Hi there friends, I'm Professor Tech, and this week we're taking a look at the game, the myth, the legend, Resident Evil 4 2023. But more specifically, we're looking at how it performs on the Steam Deck, how enjoyable it is as an experience, and how it compares to the full-blown version running on a 3080 Ti. And, not to worry, this is a spoiler-free first impressions video, so outside of Chapter 1, there will be no spoilers for the game. So without further ado, let's jump into
Resident Evil 4.
Resident Evil 4 picks up just a few short years following the events of Resident Evil 2 and 3. Leon S. Kennedy has been recruited into a special operations unit on behalf of the United States government, predominantly against his will, and he's been tasked with finding and rescuing the daughter of the President of the United States. He is escorted into a European countryside by two different police officers. One of the police officers, whilst en route to their destination, stops and has the need to, well, relieve himself. The officer leaves and is gone for quite a while, and so Leon decides to hop out and try to find the officer to see if anything's wrong, and this is where our game begins. In terms of gameplay, this particular Resident Evil remake happens to share more in common with its original form than any of the other contemporary Resident Evil remakes have. There is still an emphasis on action, with enemies rushing you more frequently and actually playing a pivotal part in the gameplay than in games past, and with more ammo lying about than any other canon Resident Evil game up to this point in the series. Leon still controls like a tank, but there is much more fluidity in this version than in the original, and drastic changes to smoothness definitely help in almost every way. Controls feel tight and are not too dissimilar from Resident Evil 2 and 3. Graphically, this game is really emphasizes foliage and detail, and while we'll get more into that soon, the sheer amount of foliage is astounding, if not downright distracting at times. But this is where the game really shines in its lighting design as well as level design. Leveraging the RE engine used in the last few games, this one allows us to see what this engine is capable of showing us in full daylight settings, albeit still with dreary, nightmarish scenes. Canonically, it still follows in the footsteps of its older brother in terms of pacing and environment, but I personally noticed that things feel even more evenly paced and less assuming than the original. But the difficulty actually feels ramped up more so now than ever before. Even on the normal playing mode, I found myself tense and worried about every turn, even in broad daylight. While I won't be going into any more story details than those covered past Chapter 1, if you're interested in seeing a full game review of Resident Evil 4, please make sure to get subscribed to the channel and leave a comment letting me know what you'd like to see in that review and what type of content you'd like to see in the future. If enough people interact and leave that as an interest, I just might do it. Yeah. Let's get down to the reason many of you are here, and that's how this game plays on Steam Deck, Valve's precious little baby, and my adopted son. So I won't lie, when I first booted up this game, there were some severe issues. There was an intense issue with some of the shadows surrounding Leon, as well as certain rocky textures and areas in the game, and at a certain point, it was just completely unplayable. And I was just so close to dunking on this game so freaking hard, it's not even funny. I was so ready to just tear into it, but then I realized, wait, maybe I need to update the Steam Deck settings. So I went through the game, updated some of the settings to lower some of their values, and made the game more fluid and playable, knocking them all down super low. No luck. So what if I changed the dock that I was using? Maybe there was some firmware issue or some issue with the signal that was coming from the particular dock. So I did that 3 separate times with 3 different docks, and still no luck. So I tried removing the dock altogether and playing handheld just to see if there was just something wrong with the firmware. No. Then I began writing my original first impressions, and I was so mad. But then I realized, oh, my Steam Deck firmware is out of date. Let me update that really quick. And I did. Still nothing. And then, by total chance, I went to give the game one last launch, one last try, and unlike the times before, I noticed something. A small notification at the bottom of the launch screen: install Vulkan shaders and skip. Now, I definitely miss things, it does happen, but none of the previous times I did this to relaunch the game did I see that option pop up at the bottom, and so I let the shaders install. And just like that, it worked. It was a shader install, causing the entire issue. A shader install that I wasn't privy to and didn't receive a prior notification for. So if you bought this game already and are trying to play it on Steam Deck, just know that you need to update to the latest firmware and launch until you see that pop-up. And if you don't see it, unlaunch, relaunch again and again and again. I think a fix for this issue would be as simple as not allowing the game to launch until the shaders are compiled, rather than let a user launch into a game half broken where they definitely can't see anything at all. Okay, now that I've gotten that rant out of the way, so once all of the debacle was fixed, how did this game run? How did it perform throughout the course of my gameplay? And what could be better about it? Overall, the game ran fine. Granted, this is a brand new AAA title that is definitely built for the newest generation of consoles and some top-of-the-line PCs in mind, because for those on desktop. And god damn, this game is beautiful. Like, look at this. Look at it, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's like if two people met and fell in love and they skipped past all the gross lovey-dovey stuff and went right to raising a child on a quiet farmhouse in the Pacific Northwest. Just, But like with the fresh, hungry villagers all around, and instead of a grayish blue hue, everything is kind of brown and yellow. And on handheld, it's still rock solid, albeit without all the niceties and the texture fidelity that definitely have some anti-aliasing issues here and there. But one way I like to see how a game performs in the texture department is the textures that you see perpetually throughout the game, such as Leon's jacket. And this is something that you'll assumedly be spending a lot of time seeing during gameplay. So I wanted that texture to be chef's kiss. And here it is. It still retains that leathery look and feel while still not compromising on the fur inlay at Leon's neck. Granted, on Steam Deck, Leon definitely has some hair frizzing and could use some conditioner. Suddenly this has become a video all about fashion and personal hygiene. Compared to the desktop version, it holds up really well, and most of the environmental textures do as well, given that one is running at 1440p with all ultra settings at 144 frames per second, and the other is at 720p, all low settings. Still pretty great. Where the textures fall apart is all the damn foliage. On desktop, again, chef's kiss. But on Steam Deck, there's just too much. You end up getting really ugly anti-aliasing and texture blending issues because there's just so much detail, but at the lower resolution and lower graphic settings, it just can't keep up and everything looks meshed and it ends up making the game look worse in my opinion. Plants blend into each other and it causes my eyes not to be able to focus because there's way too much contrast, as well as the main subject kind of blends in. But what I will say though, and this is an important caveat, is that I'm saying this based on the Steam Deck being docked, playing on the same monitor that I use when I'm playing at 1440p on the desktop. When I switch to handheld mode, this result changes slightly. The user interface and the targeting reticule look much more distinct in handheld mode, and the foliage issue doesn't bother me as much and the contrast is a little bit lower. I don't know if this is just due to a 720p image being blown up, or if the Steam Deck does something slightly different with the way it handles its graphic processing on there versus using it as a handheld versus using it in docked mode. But this game looks great in handheld versus docked mode. I much prefer playing it in the hands. However, I think that if possible, especially for a lot of modern titles that are really leaning heavily into foliage, if there were an option to toggle out some of the foliage, just to avoid the whole fringing issue that I'm sure is all too common on lower powered machines, PCs, handhelds, and even older systems, sort of like an LOD or a level of detail slider, but instead of reducing the quality, it just removes a lot of it entirely. On a scale of desert to rainforest, where would you like to be? And you could have 4 or 5 different levels. But all that aside, let's talk about performance, and in all reality, it's pretty simple. The game runs fine in both docked and handheld modes, where my frame rate stayed fairly consistent between 30 and 40 frames per second, with occasional dips into the 20s and even upper teens. However, while this is not really an issue most of the time, I was running the game at a predominantly all low settings, and during scenes where a lot of action and characters were on screen at one time, such as the Village intro. Having your frame rate dip down that low can really throw you off and cause more tension, which, given this is a survival horror series, does it make me wonder that it maybe adds to the value of the game? Wait, no, it's just poor performance. Anywho, I think a bit more optimization combined with some of the aforementioned detail toggles would help with this, but it may also just be the Steam Deck hitting its upper limit with such graphically demanding titles. In terms of wattage and heat, the game was pushing the console to the max, and the fan was definitely kicking on and running at almost full speed during most of my gameplay. The fan on the Steam Deck is really quiet though, especially if you're already on a train or a plane and most likely using headphones as it is. So to me, this is more or less a non-issue, but still one that I wanted to bring up and make worth noting. I had no issues with any of the controls, and the frame rate issues just mentioned, the game feels right at home in the hand with tight controls and overall smooth gameplay. So I've mentioned a few times throughout this video that I played the game on two polar opposite sets of performing systems. The Steam Deck, which is built and optimized for portable play, and my desktop PC, which runs 64 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM, a 3080 Ti, and Intel 13700K with NVMe drives for faster performance. Like I said, two polar opposites in terms of performance. I'm not pretending like this is a fair comparison at all, but I wanted to have a section of this video dedicated to just looking at how the two look. So if you're someone who has both a Steam Deck and a desktop, gaming laptop, or maybe even just a dedicated home console like a PS5 or an Xbox Series S or X, you can have a clearer picture of what you might be buying into if you have the two buying options. Obviously, if you're on a PC and you'd buy the game once and you would actually have both experiences, but this is more so for people that have a Steam Deck and also a home console, that kind of crowd. If you're interested in skipping this section where I'll be letting the games sort of do their own talking, skip to this time code and you'll be able to get to the last part of the review. Ultimately, if you're a Steam Deck owner and you're looking to play Resident Evil 4 2023, I would have to say that I do recommend it based on my first impressions. The game overall plays well, maybe with some future Steam Deck updates as well as possible patches from the developers themselves. The game may become even smoother to play, who knows. If you're buying the game to play predominantly in docked mode, I would say that my opinion is 50-50 on this one. If your only way to play is to get it on Steam Deck and play in dock mode, and you don't have another option available, such as a PS5 or an Xbox Series, I would say totally go for it. But if you do have those options, maybe lean more towards the console, as long as the portability factor isn't a big X for you. But if you're playing exclusively in handheld mode, I would buy this game again. 8 out of 10 would recommend. So overall, Resident Evil 4 2023 on Steam Deck gets a Professor Tech grade of a B-. A worthwhile game and solid update to the franchise that plays mostly well on Steam Deck that could use some performance enhancements in some key areas in one way or another. If you like this video, make sure to hit like down below, leave a comment letting me know what kinds of content you'd like to see in the future, and if you liked this review, please let me know so that I know to make further content like this in the future. I'm Professor Tech, I hope you have a great week, and I will see you next Monday.